What it is, people, I am Batman Dobbins, and recently 343 drove a stake into the heart of its fanbase's optimism by announcing that Halo 5 would be foregoing two-player split screen in order to maintain a consistent 60 frames per second. Now, what I really don't like about this is how quietly they've done it. So at first, people noticed that in the Xbox store, Halo 5 no longer lists split screen as an option, right? It mysteriously vanished without any kind of official announcement. Some people noticed this and asked Josh Holmes about it on Twitter, and he sort of confirmed it with this tweet. But you'll notice this is another classic example of what Stephen Colbert called truthiness, alright? This tweet could very easily be misinterpreted, and I feel like that's intentional. All Josh has to say here is, no, sorry, we don't have split screen. But instead he says it will be full screen. And the thing is, if you don't see the question he's replying to, if you don't see that in context, it doesn't necessarily confirm no split screen, right? He says all modes use full screen. That sentence by itself doesn't mean there's no split screen. If he had said all modes use only full screen, or all modes use full screen exclusively, that would confirm no split screen. But just saying it uses full screen by itself does not automatically confirm that it does not also use split screen. It's vague. This tweet intentionally leaves itself open to misinterpretation. Not to mention, you can tell he's trying to talk up, dedicated servers and make sure to mention all the game modes and whatnot. He almost makes it sound like it's an advertisement, like it's a promotion, when really this is bad news. The only way to be sure what this tweet actually means is to see the question he's replying to. But even then, the guy who asked the question recognized that it wasn't a straight answer and seemed somewhat confused by it. And you have to wonder if they even would have talked about it if people hadn't been asking about it. Now, they do mention it in one other place. They go ahead and talk about it in a post on the Halo Waypoint forums, right? So this is where they typically make their big announcements, and had they made this particular announcement more straightforward, I wouldn't be bitching at them for trying to keep it quiet. But the Waypoint post in which they discuss it is deliberately designed to just barely confirm the bad news, okay? The post itself is titled Co-op Campaign in Halo Guardians. It spends the first 18 paragraphs talking up how awesome its cooperative mode is in Halo, all their new mechanics and how super fucking duper they are. And then at the very bottom they have one paragraph explaining why they are abandoning split screen. It doesn't get its own bold header or anything, it's just some random paragraph floating around at the bottom of the screen. And look, I spend a lot of time studying audience retention on the web. I would bet money that the vast majority of the people who click on this aren't going to read 19 paragraphs. Alright, they're going to skim the first few, and they're going to scroll and look at the pretty pictures and be done with it. You know, they just barely snuck that one little piece of bad news in there at the very bottom. And look, I wouldn't even have a problem with any of this, with how they've done this, with how they've announced this, if it wasn't for the fact that they spent so long maintaining that this feature would in fact be in the game. It's one thing to downplay a feature or lack thereof when it was never there in the first place, okay? Like, if a game like Titanfall tries to downplay the fact that it has no split-screen multiplayer, or when Star Wars Battlefront tries to downplay that it doesn't have a campaign. Okay, those games never tried to pretend that they did have those things. But with Halo 5, this game had maintained that it would have split-screen multiplayer and campaign for over a year. For nearly 2 years, actually, since its announcement. And it's been open to pre-orders for that whole time. It's been open for pre-orders before the MCC was open for pre-orders. It's had hundreds of thousands of pre-orders, all placed while 343 maintained that split screen would be in the game. Knowing that, 343 has a moral and professional obligation to its fanbase to be as upfront and vocal as possible about the removal of this feature. They should not be trying to downplay this. They should not be trying to not talk about this, right? This should get its own entire post. It should not just be one paragraph at the bottom of a post advertising how awesome their campaign is. It should get its own announcement. It shouldn't just be some obscure, ambiguous, misleading fucking tweet. It should get its own announcement. That would be the only appropriate way to handle this after you've said that that mechanic was in the game for this long. And people have already spent money on the game, you know, by pre-ordering, thinking this feature was in the game. Because this isn't some small thing like, you know, we decided to take this vehicle out of the game for now because we couldn't balance it, or we're shipping with a few less maps because they're glitching out. You know, this is a big feature that for a lot of people is make or break. I'm one of those people. I was very disappointed about this because split screen was literally the only reason I was personally interested in getting this game. Pretty much the only time I play Halo nowadays is when I'm split screening with Cece, and she played a bit of that Halo 5 beta and she actually liked it more than the traditional Halos. Probably because she's a filthy casual, But Halo has been one of the last bastions of split screen gameplay, and that's a huge part of its appeal to a lot of people, because there are a lot of households out there that are in a similar situation to me where they only have one console in the house and multiple people in the house who want to play and probably enjoy playing together. You got parents and kids, you got lots of couples, and of course siblings, which is probably the biggest group of split screeners there is. Split screen is very popular in Halo. If you go play in a social playlist right now, I would bet money that every single lobby you get into has at least one pair of split screeners in it. And a lot of these people want a split screen game. They chose Halo because Halo has been the best split screen game available, but if it's not split screen, then for a lot of people, it's no longer really an option. Every couple has casual daily activities that they do together, right? If they don't have them, then they are not going to be a couple for very long. I think for most couples, they have like a TV show that they watch when they get home. That's sort of their ritual. They get home from work or whatever, and everybody has sort of a daily routine, a daily ritual. You know, it's the afternoon, they plop on the couch and watch some TV. Maybe they have some other more productive activity because they're super duper, but I think for most people it's plop on the couch, maybe pop back a cold one, watch some TV, and or play some video games. For a lot of younger couples, I think video games are starting to overtake TV. I think you're seeing a lot of more couples gaming today than in the past, mainly because video games fucking wreck TV. But if that is the activity you guys enjoy doing together, whether it's a couple or siblings or whatever, you're not going to give up that time together just because Halo doesn't have split screen. You're just going to find a different game to use for that activity. If your activity is watching TV and you finish a TV series, you don't just stop watching TV indefinitely, you just find a new show to watch. And that's true for couples and siblings and parents and their kids. And you know, close friends who want to hang out every day after school. If it's an activity you enjoy doing together, a lot of the time it's not about the game itself as much as it is about the people hanging out with one another and enjoying themselves together. Those people aren't going to stop doing their activity together because 343 dropped the fucking ball again. They're just going to find a different game. And 343 knows this, and I'm sure that's why they tried to keep this unfortunate news as quiet as possible. You know, had this information been available from the beginning, I'm sure they would have seen less pre-orders. And had they been more vocal about this bad news, I'm sure they would end up seeing less sales. Now, fortunately, the online community threw a collective bitch fit, and gaming news outlets were of course obliged to report on it, and the issue got widespread attention. But it's important to remember that if 343 had it their way, there would be a lot of people playing Halo 5 for the first time in September and only realizing then that it didn't have this feature. Because if it hadn't ballooned into a huge controversy, very few people would have actually heard about the truth. If you're a casual observer, I mean, let's say you don't check Halo Waypoint and Josh Holmes' fucking Twitter, you wouldn't know that feature was missing. And hell, even if you do check Halo Waypoint and Twitter, because of how they handled this, you might still not know the truth. They waited till a month after E3 to drop this bad news, right? I wonder if they knew during E3. The whole point to E3 is that it's, you know, that's when a lot of people get all their information about the upcoming games and technology and shit. At that time, Halo 5 was still on track to have split screen, not to mention it's been advertised as having split screen for nearly 2 years before that, and of course every Halo game released in the last 15 years has had split screen. So unless someone explicitly tells you that this game isn't going to have split screen, your natural assumption is that this game will in fact have split screen, because when you read about it at E3, it had split screen. I'm sure there are still quite a few people out there, casual observers, who are under the impression that the game will have split screen. And if you're someone for whom split screen was a must-have feature, and if you hadn't heard about this bad news and were still expecting split screen, you may end up buying a game which you otherwise would not have bought had you had all the facts. And that's what 343 wants, and that's why I fucking hate those guys sometimes. They're willing to mislead and misdirect their fans' decision-making processes in order to basically trick some of them into buying a game they otherwise might not buy had they had all the facts. That is the specific reason that they are trying to downplay this news. The less people who know about it, the less negative effect it can have on sales. They are doing their best to downplay this news as much as possible, and it's disingenuous and it's dishonest. You should judge a company by how they treat their customers, and in this, 343 should be judged harshly. As it is, I'm gonna be split screening it up on Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare 2, motherfucker. Now, it's worth noting that it was still technically possible for Halo 5 to include split screen. They are not the first game to run into this frame rate problem. Typically in the past, games that have had the same problem have simply decided to include split screen but limit the split screen to 30 frames per second, right? This is what we see with Star Wars Battlefront. They have a 60 frames per second game, but they included split screen at 30 frames. Now, that would still mean that split screeners probably can't play Halo multiplayer because the disparity between 60 and 30 would make it extremely unfair in a competitive environment. But a lot of people, including myself, are not sure why they can't still allow cooperative campaign at 30 frames per second. You know, if Battlefront can do it with their super sick graphics, I don't see why Halo 5 can't do the same. And certainly including at least some form of split screen in the game would have saved enough sales and prevented enough public backlash to justify the work it takes to scale the shit down to 30 frames per second. With that in mind, there's been some speculation that maybe this decision was made by Microsoft in order to further encourage chronic split screeners such as myself to in fact buy a second console. Because here's the thing, when I first heard this news, I thought about it. And in fact, I had thought about it even before then, just because there are so few split-screen games left that you almost have to buy a second console at this point if you're serious about gaming as a hobby with someone else in your household consistently. You know, I mean, there's only like 2 split-screen games coming out this year that I can think of off the top of my head. If you're wanting to play split-screen with your brother or whatever regularly, eventually you're going to get bored of those 2 games because they can only stay fresh and fun for so long. And if those siblings move on to non-split screen games, well then you have motherfuckers waiting to take turns and inevitably getting pissed off at each other for hogging the motherfucker, and one kid has nothing to do while the other's playing and they aren't even getting to hang out anymore. Mom wants the kids to shut the fuck up, so she just buys the little brother his own Xbox. And in fact, as many of you know, Xbox One has the virtual game sharing feature that is specifically designed to encourage households to buy more than one Xbox. Game share makes it so that you only have to buy one game and then you can have 2 people play that same game at the same time on 2 separate consoles. Now, most people just, you know, use it with their friends that are like in a different fucking state or whatever, but the idea behind it is geared towards supporting households having more than one Xbox. And even if this move, you know, and it is strictly hypothetical, but hypothetically, even if it doesn't sell that many more Xboxes, the thing about these platforms is that every unit sold has potential for exponential sales in the future, because the first thing that almost every person considers when trying to decide which console to buy is, well, what console are most of my friends on? What console am I going to have the most people to play with on, right? And with that in mind, every Xbox you get out there into the public makes it that much more likely that future customers get the Xbox because there's that many more of their friends on it or whatever, right? So because there's no split screen, Timmy's mom bought a second Xbox for their house, so now both Timmy and his big brother have an Xbox. Now, when one of Timmy's friends is considering buying an Xbox, oh, Timmy has an Xbox. Maybe I should fucking play with Timmy. You know what I mean. That is speculative, but it's just very suspicious that there's no 30 frames per second split screen option. Because it would have saved them a lot of face with their fan base, and I don't see why it wouldn't have been worth the effort of developing, you know what I mean? But regardless of all that, what's especially disappointing about this news is what it suggests about the new gen hardware, and that is that, you know, have we already hit the ceiling in terms of what is technically feasible with these new consoles? Are Halo 5's graphics as good as it gets? Does this mean that split screen is essentially dead from here on out? If anyone was positioned to take full advantage of the new gen hardware, it was 343, who was literally just a department within the actual company developing the system itself, Microsoft. And if this is the best they can do, that's a very bad sign of what's to come. But if there's one silver lining to this unfortunate news, it's that this might end up doing more to save the Master Chief Collection's playlist populations. I mean, in theory, the MCC will be like the only online multiplayer game to also feature split screen, besides Call of Duty. But let's be honest, Call of Duty split screen multiplayer gives you a fucking headache. It's all twitchy with small little fucking dudes hiding in the bushes. But at the same time, I am kind of worried about what effect backwards compatibility will have on the MCC's population. I'd be curious to know, how long ago did Microsoft know they were going to implement this backwards compatibility stuff? Because I bet you if people had known every Halo game was coming to the X1 anyways, the MCC would have seen less sales, right? And when all these games do get ported forward, you know you're going to lose some of the MCC population to Reach and Halo 4 and Halo 3, because there are plenty of players who want to play just their one game right now, and now they'll be able to do that without being interrupted by those other 3 games they don't want to play. Plus, Reach isn't even on the MCC, and I fucking loved Reach, and I know I'm going to be spending a fair amount of time on that, and for all I know, I myself might end up playing that more than the MCC. So, in conclusion, everything is fucked up, and I guess I'm just along for the ride, but it's comforting to know that if I'm going to be pissed off, at least I get to be pissed off with you guys. And thanks for always letting me vent. May the force be with you all. Please be sure to rate the video if you enjoyed it. The For the Win query of the day is, how often do you play split screen? Who do you play it with? And how disappointed are you by 343's decision to remove it? This is Dobbins, signing out.